Hi, good afternoon, everybody. This is Xiomara Corpeño with Frontline Dispatch. We are a show coming out of Organizing Upgrade. Please make sure to like our page and follow us on Facebook. I'm joined today by Nana Gyamfi from the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. Thank you for joining us today. I know you're just ending a long day after the National Immigrant Integration Conference, so welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to see you.
I'm glad to see you too. Well, before we get started with, tell us about Black migrants. I think when we think about the immigrant rights movement here in this country, we mostly think about Mexican and Central American migrants coming through, which is the part of the work that I've been doing for many years. But tell us, who are Black migrants? Where are they coming from, and how are they coming into the U.S.?
So, Black migrants are all the Black folks that are not born in this country that have come into this country. We extended in the context of BAJI to also include our family members, right? And so I was born in this country, and my family's originally from Ghana. But as I say, like a Toyota made in Kansas, I continue to be Ghanaian. And then I have a son who also continues to be Ghanaian. But when we talk about Black migrants coming into this country, we're talking about both immigrants and refugees. They're coming in from the continent of Africa as well as from the Caribbean. And where we look at the top countries that folks are coming from, we're talking about Jamaica, we're talking about Haiti, we're talking about Ethiopia, we're talking about Somalia, we're talking about Nigeria, and of course, all of the other countries, like every country on the continent is represented, as well as the Caribbean. We're also talking about Black migrants that are coming from the South America, right? That are coming from Brazil, that are coming from other countries in South America, including those that people don't think about, such as Peru and Chile. And then we have folks coming from Central America, the Garifuna, some English speaking, some Spanish speaking, some speaking Garifuna, as well as folks they're Black, but not Garifuna, coming from Central America. And of course, in a place like California, 1 out of every 10 Black people come from Mexico. And so we've got Black folks coming in from all over the world, including Canada and Europe.
Thank you. And we just saw a recent LA Times article outlined that African and Caribbean asylum seekers are being systematically targeted right now by the Trump administrations for detention and deportation, oftentimes tricking people, using violence against them to deport them. And so tell us a little bit. One is, how do these migrants end up in detention? And then two is, what's the response from BAJI?
So part of what you asked me in the earlier question is, how are people getting here? So some people are getting here clearly, by plane. And generally speaking, those folks are coming in on some kind of visa. Maybe they have a permanent visa, right? Or what's also called a green card. Maybe they have a student visa, a business visa. And so that gets checked before you even get on the plane. But there are other folks who are coming to this country as asylees. They're coming to seek asylum. And most of those folks are coming through the southern border of the United States, right along the line with Mexico. They're coming from all over the continent. There's some particular places such as Haiti, Cameroon, Eritrea, the Congo, but you also have folks coming from Nigeria, from Ghana, from Angola, from Jamaica. So it's not so limited. And they're making this harrowing journey. I mean, when we sit and we talk to folks about how they get here, they are crossing sometimes 11 borders, coming all the way from Brazil and walking on foot, taking buses, getting robbed, getting beaten, some getting raped, getting tortured, getting thrown in jails and detention centers all along the way. Others are coming in from Ecuador. At least previously, prior to the Trump administration, getting Ecuador to keep people from being able to come in. They were coming in through Ecuador and then crossing in from there. And then once they get to the border, the southern border actually of Mexico, there's another experience. As I said, every country they go through, there's some detention experience. When they get to Mexico, it's almost like they hit a wall. And there's a harrowing detention experience there. When they are finally able to get out of detention in southern Mexico, they then make their way again by foot, by horse, by car, by bus, however they can get there, to the northern border of Mexico, southern border of the United States, where they are supposed to be able to claim asylum. And if they are successful in being able to make that asylum claim, the first thing that happens is that the United States puts them in a cage. Okay, so they've made that harrowing journey.
Mandatory detention.
Excuse me?
Mandatory detention. Mandatory detention no matter what.
No matter what. So they're immediately, I don't care. They don't care what you went through to get here, how you had to get here, whether you have family members, children, whatever the situation, you are put into detention. And there is where we're finding that Black migrants are pushing back and saying, look, we are being treated. First of all, why are we in a cage? We shouldn't be caged. We've come here looking for asylum. Secondly, we're being discriminated against based upon our race in these cages. So we're seeing that our medical conditions are not being paid attention to, that we're not being able to have access to calling our attorneys or calling our family members, that our family members are finding it more difficult if they are around or our loved ones to be able to assist us. We're finding that it's harder to get attorneys to pay attention to us. And so they're speaking up and speaking out about the conditions that they're experiencing. This is even before COVID. Of course, that's been increased now. And we see that ICE is retaliating against them, specifically retaliating against Cameroonian, Somali, Haitian, and other Black migrants who are doing hunger strikes. They're engaged in protests. They are using the language of Black Lives Matter, sending letters out, notifying people of their situations. And we are being deported at increasingly high rates, higher and higher every week, the number of deportations of folks back to Haiti, back to Cameroon, back to the Congo, back to the countries of our origin. It's really tragic. The torture that you talked about, that they're being used against them to get them to sign falsified documents that would allow them to be able to be set back without a lot of red tape. All of that is happening, and BAJI is, raising the alarm, has reached out to Congress, has pushed the CBC and other congressional folks to step in, has been working in coalition with other organizations to try to get letters out, sign-on letters, petitions, just everything that we can think of to keep our folks from being retaliated against and deported in this manner after all they've been through.
And once people are released from detention, I think there's an assumption that all is well after that, right? Actually, after you get released from detention, you may still have to fight your case, or they're appealing your case. You may or may not have a work permit. And so in this COVID moment, what's going on with these African migrants or Black migrants who are coming here and are outside of detention, but obviously living through COVID?
It's a really difficult situation, because when we look at the type of funding that's being supplied, where that's happening, right, where that funding is coming, generally the folks are focused on are undocumented people, and they're being really specific, even in terms of which undocumented people COVID mutual aid funds can go to. And instead of sort of having a blanket, it creates a situation in which people that are coming out of detention, they fall through the cracks, right? They're not part of that undocumented group. And so BAJI right now is raising funds as part of our national COVID mutual aid to be able to provide some monies for those people who fall through the cracks. Not exclusively, right? Because we know that our people are in need of assistance, especially Black migrants. Even those Black migrants that have some kind of papers, right, are still laid off from their jobs, are still not able to get any kind of assistance from the government, and are in need. But especially those folks that are just getting out of detention. Organizations like BAJI, BLMP, Black LGBTQ Migrant Project, are working on how do we provide support services? How do we help people with housing when they get out? How do we help people get to the loved ones they may have? They need rides to the airport. They need clothes. Literally, they're coming with the clothes on their back.
Rides to their appointments.
Drive to their appointments. They need help filling out paperwork. Language access is a big issue for Black migrants, right? And so either we're speaking our own languages, right, our indigenous languages, and there's nothing in our indigenous languages, but even like in a place like California, they just decide that French is not important to put on things, even if though it's a colonizer language, right? Because the focus is on Spanish or English.
Right.
And so when you have, if they just would include French, it would cover so many people on the continent. But that's been very difficult to come by. And so we have to help. We have to connect people with resources to enable them to even get that language access assistance to be able to understand what's available for them with programs, what's happening with testing with COVID. We've pushed and we've pressed. It's part of our advocacy to make sure that our communities and our languages are included as well.
Thank you. I want to just talk about, I've been part of the immigrant rights movement for a long time. I've been an organizer mostly with Mexican and Central American communities. And I think that there's a lot of assumptions around like who immigrants are. I think mainstream media has really adopted these messages about people being American and obviously, with our Black Lives Matter movement, like U.S. born Black citizens, right, are still not treated right the same as other folks. And so I'd love to hear from you, how can the immigrant rights movement really use this moment, this Black Lives Matter moment, to really shift the way that we talk about immigration and immigrant justice in this country? I think we froze up a little bit over there. Great. So we'll hear back from Nana in a little bit. I know there was just a little bit of a glitch, and we had the lights go out here in LA for a second, so maybe that might be affecting her internet. But I just wanted to add to this piece that a lot of times in the immigrant rights movement, we're not speaking about we're still talking about, for example, DACA, the DACA decisions, as if as it's like, okay, well, we should be allowed to stay here. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement can actually help us take us to the next level into thinking about actually how does immigrant rights, how do immigrant rights and immigrant justice actually grab onto an abolitionist framework? And so that's really what the point was, Nana, if you want to speak to that.
Yes, absolutely. So thinking about how we see immigrant rights as a racial justice issue and the importance of that. When we look at this country, and your conversation, you started off talking about, connecting to this idea of citizenship and being American, et cetera. When we talk about immigrant rights, it's important for us to really define where is the notion that someone is an outsider come from, right? We understand that in this country, if you are white and an immigrant, you are still considered to be someone who can be part of this country. There's no question. When they talk about the story of Ellis Island and, the give us your huddled poor and all of that the United States did a much better job of integrating, for lack of a better expression, and accepting white immigrants. It wasn't without problems, right? There wasn't without friction. But at the end of the day, this idea of who has the right to now have permanent protection has certainly been racialized. Blackness is the ultimate lack of permanent protection. Citizen or not citizen. To be Black is to be a person who is in danger of harm. And so when we talk about how you can be a citizen in this country, as a Black person, you're automatically eliminated. As an Indigenous person, you're automatically eliminated. And so when we look at immigrants of color that are coming to this country, we need to have a conversation about how whiteness is tied to protection and how non-whiteness is tied to a lack of protection. And that lack of protection is carried out by the state by enforcement, right? Whether that be local law enforcement, whether that be lifted up to the level of immigration enforcement, whether that become on a global level, militarism and the way that the United States engages in U.S. imperialism across the globe. But the idea is that who is human, who is deserving, who is worthy of being able to have these inalienable rights that are described in the Constitution of the United States, to have the human rights that are enshrined within our own cultural concepts, as well as within UN charters and documents, is defined in the United States de facto as white people, and who is not entitled to those things. It's defined de facto as non-white people. This country's immigration policy, all of its exclusions, its restrictions, have always been about having the United States viewed and seen and positioned as a white ethno-state. And force is necessary to make that happen. And so we cannot talk about the ending of the harm to immigrant rights and to immigrants, without talking about the ending of the tools and the mechanisms of engaging in that harm, which include enforcement, cops in cages.
Correct. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's a spirited conversation that we continue to have and that we have to continue to have. Just speaking to what you spoke a little bit about just politics in the U.S. We just had one of the major elections of our lifetime. I'm sure they're getting more and more important as every time we have a presidential election. But BAJI started doing electoral work, like for the first time, really fully in. Tell us a little bit about why you decided to do that work.
So we decided to do that work this time really as an intervention. I mean, BAJI, as you know, is always sort of on the edge. We're like the more radical cousins within the immigrant rights movement. And so if the state it can be symbolized by people in the glass house, usually BAJI's outside the glass house, right? With bullhorns and signs and maybe a few folks might have some rocks in their hands, right? And this is normally the position that we're in. But we understood that with the Trump administration, we were dealing with a level of fascism, a level of anti-Blackness, racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, heteronormativity, patriarchy. It was everything, anti-earth, the universe, that we knew that something had to be done and that we had to make sure that our people who are so harmed by the policies of the administration of 44 and a half, as I refer to him, that we had to make sure that we were not going to go through another 4-year descent into the depths. And so we decided that we would really get our folks, both people who could vote, as well as folks who are not able to vote because of immigration status, because of criminalization, to get out there and to make sure that we intervened and stopped the continuance of the Trump administration. Now, for some of our community members, the idea of having, the Biden administration come in is very exciting and was very exciting, especially with Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, with her background as an immigrant, born of Jamaican and Indian immigrants. And so people, were excited about that. But you had a lot of folks, and understandably so, at least from my political perspective, that weren't so excited necessarily about the candidates, but were intent upon stopping the Trump administration from being reelected. And we were able to accomplish that. For all of us, we're looking at continuing the role of intervener. So yes, we are going sometimes as BAJI into the glass house, but when we're going in the glass house, it's not as to collaborate or to compromise before the administration even gets in there. It's really to let folks know, see those people back there with the bullhorns and with the signs and, who got you in here. These are the things and the demands that they have. And we're not going to compromise and collaborate with you to figure out the best way to give them the bad news, that you're not going to do what is necessary. Right. Instead, we're making sure that you know what our people want and that you're clear about that.
Right. I mean, one of the first things that came out of the transition team, Cecilia Munoz, who was basically an apologist for the Obama administration and their detention and deportation proceedings, and Most recently, Adi Mayorkas was the new head of the Department of Homeland Security. He was the head of USCIS and then deputy Homeland Security Secretary. And so what are the prospects? And then actually, what are you pushing the administration for? Because it doesn't matter what, they're not going to give us anything without demand. So what are y'all demanding?
So we're demanding it all, brand new socks and drawers. We're asking for everything. We want to end to deportations, right? What we're asking the administration to do is to modernize the system of migration in this country, right? Mm-hmm. You know, when we're talking about things like universal health care, this is a modern idea of what healthcare should be. And so we have a similar notion that we should have a migration policy that is based upon and rooted in human rights, including the right to migrate. So we're saying an end to deportations, not a moratorium, which kind of gives the idea that after 100 days, suddenly you're going to start deporting everyone. No, stop deporting people. There's no reason to deport people. Stop doing it. So we're asking for a stop to that. Detention. We want people to be released. Detention is torture. Yes. Detention is, we don't do that to dogs. We don't do it to cats. Even Shamu, we done freed Shamu from the San Diego zoo, right? We've laid it so that's not, why are we still caging people? Detention is torture. Detention should end. So not only should we not be detaining people, but we should be letting people who are detained out without electronic monitoring. We're not asking to now go to some sci-fi world where everything is now done, through electronics. Instead of an ankle bracelet, it'll be a pretty watch or a nice earrings. No, we're saying bring that to an end. No more detention, no more deportations, no surveillance. And then let's switch migration into what it should be, an administrative process. As you know, Xiomara, when white people want to go anywhere in the world, they just go there, they show up, they're called expats. No one bothers them. It's an administrative process. They don't have to jump through hoops. They don't have to prove that they're worthy of being Ghanaian citizens or Mexican citizens. They just go there. Right. And that's the way it should be. I'm not mad at them. That's how it should be for all of us.
Well, what's interesting about that, Nana, too, is that most people don't understand that immigration law is actually administrative law. It's like parking in the red. It's actually not criminal law. And, the conservative and right wing and, white supremacists have really linked it to criminalization, right? And that's an important piece. Thank you for putting that out there. What about TPS holders? And then, I think, here we go again, another cry for immigration reform, which whatever you want to call it, I love that you're calling it modernization. What is that path to citizenship? And yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
So when you look at TPS, I mean, obviously we feel like the folks that have TPS right now, we don't want that taken away from them. But it's time to give people permanent protections. It's time to stop talking about temporary status. Again, if we modernize our system such that we recognize that migration is a human right, we don't have to temporarily give people the opportunity to be treated half human, right? We can go ahead and just give it all up and allow them to have permanent protections. And so that's what we're looking for. And we're also looking for the permanent protections to not be limited to citizenship. Look, someone should not have to be an American citizen and become an American citizen to live in this country, to be in this country, to have children in this country, if that's what they choose to do, to work in this country, if that's what they choose to do. They should not have to be a citizen in order to have a peace of mind. We should not have a system that's based upon you having a permanent pass. I'm thinking of apartheid South Africa that you've got to show just because you weren't born in this country. And so we are looking for permanent protections that are whatever that needs to be. If that's permanent residency, if there's another category, right? Because sometimes you can't destroy the master's house with the master's tools. We may have to come up with something new, but a mechanism that allow people to be able to live here without having to, renounce their home, without having to invest in these exceptionalist ideas of what America is, and still be able to contribute and do what they need to do.
Excellent. So really like turning this whole idea about like becoming an American or integrating. Absolutely. It's like actually just let people live, let them live their lives.
Right. I mean, George Floyd was an American. Breonna Taylor was an American, as you pointed out before. So clearly this citizenship is not all it's cracked up to be if you're not a white person. And, brown folks, black folks, API folks, indigenous folks, if we don't know that by now, then we got other lessons, that this half hour is not going to help people out with. We got some deeper things to talk about. But if you're clear about that, then you know that what we really want is permanent protections and the respect for our human rights and human dignity.
Absolutely. I'm wondering if there's I belong to a large immigrant rights community that I'm very proud of, and I continue to build bridges with. What message do you have for immigrant rights advocates who are not necessarily working with Black migrants right now, but want to figure out how to do more and do better? What advice would you have for them?
So definitely reach out to us at info@baji.org, right? Check out BAJI, look for the Black immigrant organizations that are in your area. They exist, not just the social organizations, but folks who are organizing on the ground, people like the Black Immigrant Collective in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, like the United African Organization in Chicago, etc. Also, really take it upon yourself to make this a personal issue for you, right? We want this to be beyond the conversation, beyond allyship. We talked today and this whole week at the NIC in terms of Black folks about doing more beyond solidarity, right? Let us have the kind of working relationship where we're not just centering Black migrants, but we're allowing Black migrants to continue to be in the forefront. We're recognizing the fact that when we look at all the liberation talk that happens in this country, that this talk is the creative output of Black minds, whether they be multi-generational African-American or Black migrant like Marcus Garvey, Kwame Ture, Audre Lorde, etc., and give us our space, right? So it's not like learn our language and then exclude us from all the conversations and keep quoting our people, which is what we've been experiencing, right? And so part of our exhaustion as Black immigrant organizers is with that. Is with doing all of this work, doing all of this, creating, innovating, generating, and then seeing that we are still sort of excluded, marginalized in the larger immigrant rights movement. It's okay to share space, and it's even okay to follow. We did that with Black people, particularly Black women with this election, and look, we won. So if we can just do that, we'll be on the road to liberation.
Right. Educate yourself and follow and listen, learn to listen and follow. Thank you so much, Nana, for being with us here today. I want to thank our audience for being with us here today. If you enjoyed this video, please share it and also stay up to speed with all the amazing content coming out of organizingupgrade.org. You'll find really great articles on left perspective for organizers. Please sign up on our website, follow us on Facebook and also YouTube. And we also want to thank our production team today. Thank you for seeing us through. Please join us next week, the same day, Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. That's 6 p.m. Central Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we look forward to seeing you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being on.